Recovered picked feed material from several Imperial war zones shows the same pattern repeated across unrelated battlefields. The first sign is usually not the organism itself, but the failure of fixed defences that were believed to be sufficient against heavy assault creatures. Bunker walls are punctured before forward observers can identify a firing position. Armoured columns are recorded halting, reversing, or burning in place. Vox traffic from surviving crews often describes a large Tyranid bioform advancing through return fire with limited visible reaction. Later investigation classifies the organism as the Tyrannofex. The Tyrannofex does not possess an origin in the way Imperial scholars would define the founding of a regiment, the commissioning of a tank pattern, or the construction of a fortress engine. It is not created through political decree, industrial planning, or hereditary tradition. It emerges from the adaptive processes of the Tyranid hive fleets, shaped by battlefield requirement, biological efficiency, and the selective will of the Hive Mind. Its existence indicates that the Tyranids identified a repeated tactical need across multiple invasions. The need for a heavy, resilient, forward-moving bioform capable of engaging enemy armour, fortifications, and concentrated resistance without depending on fragile artillery positions or captured infrastructure. Within the broader structure of Tyranid warfare, the Tyrannofex appears to represent an answer to enemy reliance on strong points and armoured superiority. Many Imperial defenders build their plans around massed tanks, void-shielded gates, reinforced ferrocrete lines, and kill zones designed to break waves of lesser organisms. Against ordinary gaunts and mid-sized warrior forms, these methods can delay an infestation long enough for evacuation, reinforcement, or orbital fire support. The Tyrannofex changes that calculation. It is not merely a larger assault beast pushed toward the front. It is a living siege platform, a mobile biological weapon system with enough durability to remain operational under fire that would destroy most smaller organisms. Its development is best understood as a functional adaptation rather than a single historical event. Tyranid organisms are not manufactured in separate technological schools or preserved as sacred marks of design. They're grown, consumed, assessed, and reconstituted through the bio-industrial cycle of the hive fleet. When enemy weapons prove effective, the swarm changes. When enemy defences create delays, the swarm produces organisms capable of bypassing or destroying those defences. The Tyrannofex likely arose from this same strategic pressure. Repeated encounters with battle tanks, fortress gates, bastion networks, and entrenched heavy infantry would have provided the Hive Mind with sufficient information to refine a creature that could operate as both battering platform and weapons carrier. The organism's physical development reflects that purpose. It possesses immense mass, heavy armour plating, and a posture suited for bearing extremely large bioweapons. Its body is not optimised for speed in the manner of leaping assault organisms or serpentine burrowers. It is built around endurance, stability, and forward pressure. The creature's frame allows it to carry weapon symbiotes that would be impractical for lesser Tyranid forms. This gives it a battlefield role comparable to a super-heavy support organism, though it remains smaller than the largest Tyranid biotitans. In Imperial reports, this distinction is important because it places the Tyrannofex in a dangerous middle category. It is not rare enough to be dismissed as an apocalyptic singularity, but it is powerful enough that ordinary anti-infantry planning becomes irrelevant once it appears. The founding pattern of the Tyrannofex, if the term can be applied at all, is therefore biological and strategic. It is founded wherever the hive mind requires a living engine of attrition. It is founded in digestion pools, in spawning chambers, and in the unseen command logic of synaptic direction. No single hive fleet can be credited with the concept in a conventional sense, because the Tyranid method of development does not preserve authorship. A Tyrannofex may appear during one invasion as a response to entrenched Imperial armour, then reappear elsewhere as part of an evolved assault pattern against fortified Xeno settlements or Mechanicus defence grids. The organism's recurrence across war zones suggests that the design proved valuable enough to be retained within the swarm's wider biological arsenal. Its battlefield development also demonstrates a central principle of Tyranid evolution. The swarm does not separate weapon, soldier, and vehicle. In the Tyrannofex, these categories are fused into one organism. Its armour is grown, not forged. Its primary weapon is not mounted in the Imperial sense, but integrated into its living structure. Its ammunition, targeting behaviour and battlefield movement are governed by biological systems linked to the wider synaptic network. To an Imperial observer, this makes the creature difficult to classify. It advances like a siege tank, endures like a fortress beast, and fights as part of a distributed predatory intelligence, rather than as an independent combatant. Early encounters with Tyrannofex organisms often produced confusion among defenders because the creature did not behave like a simple monster seeking direct melee contact. It could support advancing swarms from range, apply pressure against hard targets, and force enemy armour to reposition. This mattered because many anti-Tyranid defences depend on predictable waves. Lesser organisms draw fire, larger creatures close the distance, and synapse beasts maintain battlefield cohesion. The Tyrannofex complicates that defensive model by adding heavy firepower to the swarm's forward mass. It allows the Tyranid assault to punish defenders who remain behind walls and punish vehicles that attempt to dominate open ground. The existence of the Tyrannofex also reveals the scale of the Tyranid threat in a more practical way. It shows that the Hive fleets do not rely only on overwhelming numbers. They also produce specialized organisms when resistance demands specialization. The Tyrannofex is not subtle, and it is not versatile in the social or intellectual sense. Its value lies in the direct application of biological mass, armor, and destructive force. It is a creature grown for situations where the enemy must be broken physically, where the swarm cannot afford delay, and where conventional Tyranid bodies require a heavier instrument to open the path. By the time Imperial archives began identifying the Tyrannofex as a recurring organism rather than a battlefield anomaly, its role had already become clear. It was the Tyranid answer to the armoured bastion, the siege gun, and the battle tank. Its origin is not a place or date, but a need recognised by the Hive Mind across countless consumed worlds. Its founding is not ceremonial, but functional. Its development is the result of repeated war, repeated resistance, and repeated adaptation. Where defenders create walls, the Tyranids grow weapons to breach them. Where armies rely on steel, the Tyranids answer with chitin, muscle, and living artillery. The Tyrannofex is distinguished first by its scale, and second by the degree to which its body is shaped around the carriage of a primary bioweapon. Many large Tyranid organisms are dangerous because they combine size, aggression, and durability, but the Tyrannofex is more specialized than a general assault beast. Its physical structure is arranged around the support of a massive cannon organism fused into its torso and upper body. This gives the creature the battlefield profile of a living siege platform rather than a simple predator. Its limbs, armor, and posture exist to keep that weapon stable, while the organism advances through punishing return fire. The outer body is protected by thick chitinous plates that are layered and reinforced in a manner comparable to natural armor. These plates do not function as passive covering alone. They allow the Tyrannofex to remain in exposed ground where smaller organisms would be destroyed before reaching effective range. The creature is not usually described as fast, and it does not need to be. Its value is not in sudden pursuit or rapid flanking. Its value is in persistence. It advances under fire, absorbs punishment, and forces the enemy to commit weapons that might otherwise be used against synapse beasts, monstrous assault organisms, or the massed lesser broods closing behind it. The Tyrannofex's most important distinctive trait is the integration of weapon and organism. Imperial vehicles mount guns on metal frames, fed by ammunition stores, crewed by operators, and repaired by external support teams. The Tyrannofex carries its weapon as part of its own biological system. The cannon is grown into the creature, supplied by internal processes, and directed through the same predatory and synaptic impulses that guide the rest of the swarm. This reduces the distinction between platform and artillery. The Tyrannofex does not carry equipment in the Imperial sense. It is the equipment, the carrier, the ammunition system, and the armoured hull combined into one living form. The most infamous of its known primary weapons is the rupture cannon. This bioweapon fires 2 organic projectiles in rapid sequence. The first projectile is a bloated tick-like organism that bursts against the target and coats it in an oily biological substance. The second is a seed pod enclosed in an extremely durable shell. When the second projectile strikes and mixes with the residue of the first, the reaction causes the shell to dissolve and produces a catastrophic implosive effect. Imperial accounts describe the result as strong enough to tear armoured vehicles apart from within. Because of this, the rupture cannon is treated as one of the most dangerous Tyranid weapons carried by any organism smaller than a true biotitan. Its presence changes how enemy armour can be deployed, since tanks that would normally dominate open ground may become priority targets for a creature that can endure long enough to fire into them. Another known configuration is the acid spray. In this form, the Tyrannofex carries large internal reservoirs of caustic digestive fluid. The weapon is designed less for precision anti-armour fire, and more for area denial, infantry destruction, and the reduction of organic or lightly protected targets. The fluid is capable of breaking down organic matter rapidly and can corrode through body armour. Against infantry holding trenches, hab block entrances, barricades, or bunker mouths, the acid spray gives the Tyrannofex a different battlefield use. It can flush defenders out of prepared positions or destroy them where they stand, turning fortified infantry positions into feeding grounds for the swarm's advance. The fleshborer hive represents a third major weapon pattern. Rather than firing a single explosive projectile or projecting corrosive fluid, this configuration houses a colony of aggressive fleshborer organisms. These creatures mature rapidly inside the Tyrannofex's weapon chambers and must be expelled in large numbers. The result is a living storm of small predatory bioammunition, useful against massed infantry and lighter targets. It is a weapon that reflects the Tyranid preference for nested biological systems. A large organism carries a weapon that contains smaller organisms, each of which functions as ammunition and predator at the same time. The Tyrannofex may also be associated with secondary bioweapons, such as stinger salvos, electroshock organisms, desiccator larvae, cluster spines, or other thoracic swarm adaptations depending on the strain and battlefield requirement. These weapons are not the defining reason for the creature's existence, but they prevent enemies from treating it as helpless once its main target is unavailable. At close range, its sheer mass and powerful limbs also remain dangerous. A Tyrannofex is not a fragile artillery beast that can be neutralized by reaching its position. Even if engaged directly, it is still a monstrous Tyranid organism with enough physical strength to crush infantry and damage lighter battlefield assets. Its tactical doctrine is simple in principle, but severe in execution. The Tyrannofex is committed where the swarm requires durable forward firepower. It may advance with screening broods that protect it from being surrounded, or it may operate near synapse organisms that keep the wider assault coordinated. Its role is to apply pressure against hard targets, while the rest of the swarm exploits the disruption. Against armour, the rupture cannon configuration can force enemy tanks to withdraw, disperse, or accept catastrophic losses. Against infantry concentrations, acid spray and fleshborer patterns can break defensive density and reduce the effectiveness of trenches, barricades, and narrow approaches. The Tyrannofex also has an important psychological and strategic function, although that function is only incidental from the perspective of the Hive Mind. To Imperial defenders, the sight of a Tyrannofex surviving heavy fire while delivering its own return bombardment can undermine confidence in established defensive doctrine. Soldiers trained to believe that thick walls, armoured vehicles, and prepared kill zones can hold back a swarm are forced to watch those assumptions fail. Commanders must then choose between concentrating fire on the Tyrannofex or preserving enough firepower to suppress the rest of the Tyranid attack. Neither option is clean. Focusing too much on the Tyrannofex allows lesser organisms to close. Ignoring it allows the living siege gun to continue dismantling the defence. For this reason, the Tyrannofex is best understood as a pressure instrument within the larger Tyranid method of war. It is not deployed to win battles by itself. It is deployed to make certain enemy strategies collapse faster. It punishes static defense, threatens armoured confidence, and gives the swarm a biological equivalent to heavy artillery without sacrificing the mobility and self-sustaining nature of Tyranid warfare. Its weapons are not separate tools selected for convenience. They are expressions of the same adaptive logic that defines the entire species. Where the enemy hides behind walls, the Tyrannofex brings corrosion. Where the enemy relies on tanks, it brings implosive biological artillery. Where the enemy masses infantry, it brings living ammunition. In all configurations, its doctrine remains consistent. Advance, endure, break the strongest point, and allow the swarm to pass through. The Tyrannofex does not possess personality in the individual or human sense. It does not demonstrate ambition, pride, fear, loyalty, rivalry, memory of honour or preference for one battlefield over another. Any appearance of temperament comes from function, instinct, and synaptic control. To Imperial observers, this can create the impression of grim patience or deliberate malice, because the organism often continues advancing under fire with little visible hesitation. That impression is understandable, but it is also misleading. The Tyrannofex is not brave when it endures enemy guns. It is not stubborn when it keeps moving through artillery impacts. It is not cruel when it destroys a bunker or burns infantry from cover. It is a biological instrument acting according to the requirements of the Hive Mind. Its behavioural pattern is shaped by the same principles that govern most Tyranid organisms, though expressed through a much heavier battlefield role. When connected to the synaptic web, the Tyrannofex functions as part of a greater predatory intelligence. Its actions are not those of an independent creature making tactical judgments in isolation. It is directed, adjusted and coordinated through the command structure of the swarm, usually by larger synapse organisms or the surrounding psychic influence of the hive fleet. Within that connection, it becomes precise in the way a weapon can be precise. It moves where pressure is needed. It fires where resistance must be broken. It endures damage because its continued function serves the larger assault. Outside synaptic influence, its behaviour would likely degrade into more instinctive predatory activity, as with many Tyranid organisms separated from the wider control system. However, this does not make the Tyrannofex harmless or disorganised in a simple sense. A creature of its size, armour and weapon capacity remains a catastrophic threat even without the full coordination of the swarm. What changes is not its destructive potential, but its efficiency within the battle plan. Under synaptic control, the Tyrannofex is not merely dangerous, it is placed where its violence has maximum strategic effect. Its organisational alignment is therefore absolute. The Tyrannofex belongs wholly to the Tyranid hive fleets, and by extension, to the biological will of the Hive Mind. It has no allegiance that can be negotiated, corrupted, bought or redirected by conventional means. It does not serve a dynasty, empire, cult, machine order, warlord, or instinct of personal survival. Its existence is inseparable from Tyranid consumption. It is aligned not to a factional doctrine written in law, but to a living system that treats all biomass, resistance, and environment as resources to be assessed and consumed. Within the swarm, the Tyrannofex occupies a role comparable to a heavy assault organism and siege weapons platform. It is not a synapse leader in the manner of a hive tyrant, Tyranid prime, or other command organism. It does not guide the swarm through psychic authority. Instead, it receives its place within the battle from that authority. Its purpose is execution rather than command. This distinction matters because the Tyrannofex is powerful without being strategically independent. It can reshape a battlefield, but it does so as part of a greater pattern. When it appears, it is usually one component within a wider attack involving lesser broods, monstrous organisms, aerial forms, tunneling creatures, and synapse nodes maintaining cohesion. Imperial classification often struggles with this kind of organism because the Tyrannofex crosses several military categories at once. It can be understood as heavy armour because it advances under direct fire and draws anti-tank weapons. It can be understood as artillery because its primary weapons can destroy targets at range. It can be understood as a siege engine because it is effective against fortifications and prepared defences. It can also be understood as a monstrous creature because it remains biologically alive, capable of physical assault, and integrated into a predatory ecosystem. None of these definitions is fully wrong, but none is complete by itself. The Tyrannofex's relationship to the wider Tyranid organism hierarchy is practical rather than social. It does not command gaunts, negotiate territory with Carnifex broods, or compete for dominance against other large organisms. It is grown for a task and positioned where that task becomes necessary. Lesser organisms may screen its advance. Synapse creatures may direct its movements. Larger bioforms may exploit the damage it creates. This arrangement is not cooperation in the human military sense. It is coordination through a shared biological intelligence. The swarm does not require morale meetings, command briefings, or doctrinal debate. It operates through need, response, and adaptation. This also explains why the Tyrannofex has no known culture, social behaviour, or personal history. Individual specimens may be recorded in battle reports because of the destruction they caused, but those records reflect Imperial attempts to make sense of a recurring threat. The swarm itself does not preserve the identity of one Tyrannofex as distinct from another. If a specimen is destroyed, its biomass may be recovered and recycled if the battlefield is taken. If its design proves successful, the pattern may appear again. If enemy conditions require adjustment, the next organism may carry a different weapon symbiote or operate in a different assault formation. The individual does not matter. The function continues. In conclusion, the Tyrannofex represents one of the clearest examples of Tyranid battlefield adaptation turned into living heavy warfare. Its origin lies in the Hive Mind's need to overcome armour, fortifications, and dense defensive formations. Its body is developed around endurance and weapon integration. Its behaviour is not personal but directed, and its alignment is inseparable from the consuming logic of the hive fleets. It is not a beast with motives, not a soldier with loyalty, and not a machine with crew or doctrine written into manuals. It is a grown answer to resistance. Where Imperial armies build battle tanks, the Tyranids grow armoured organisms. Where Forge Worlds produce siege guns, the Tyranids evolve living artillery. Where commanders rely on walls, trenches, and armoured spearheads, the Tyrannofex exists to make those advantages temporary. Its presence on a battlefield indicates that the swarm has moved beyond simple mass assault and has begun applying specialised force against the strongest points of resistance. For defenders, this makes the creature more than another large Tyranid target. It is a sign that the Hive Mind has assessed the battlefield, identified the structures that must fall, and grown a weapon capable of breaking them. Adeptus Administratum records concerning the Tyrannofex are usually not written with the technical precision of Mechanicus Biologia's material. They are written around consequences. The Administratum notices the Tyrannofex where casualty rates shift, where armoured losses rise beyond expected projections, where fortress garrisons request emergency reinforcement, and where standard defensive timetables collapse. To its clerks, logisticians, and strategic auditors, the Tyrannofex is not first understood as a creature. It is understood as a disruption in projected survival. In most administratum assessments, Tyranid invasions are already difficult to calculate because they do not follow the attritional logic of ordinary wars. Enemy armies usually require supply lines, ammunition reserves, fuel allocation, command staff, staging grounds, and recoverable equipment. Tyranid swarms do not follow that model in any clean way. Their dead can become future biomass. Their ammunition may be living. Their weapons are grown rather than manufactured. The Tyrannofex deepens this administrative failure because it occupies the role of a heavy weapons platform without the predictable weaknesses of a conventional artillery unit or battle tank. It does not require Prometheum convoys, maintenance depots, or replacement barrels. It does not need roads, crew rotation, or repair servitors. It advances as part of the swarm's biological momentum. This makes the first impression of the Tyrannofex unusually severe. A world threatened by Tyranid assault may prepare anti-infantry kill zones, layered mine belts, armoured reserves, and hardened command bunkers. These preparations can remain valid against lesser organisms for a limited period. They can thin the front ranks, delay pressure, and buy time for evacuation or counterattack. When a Tyrannofex is encountered, Administratum reports often shift from measuring defensive endurance in days to measuring it in hours. The creature's presence suggests that the swarm has brought forward a dedicated answer to the defensive line itself. The problem is not only that the Tyrannofex kills, the problem is that it invalidates assumptions around what a fortified position can withstand. From an Adeptus Mechanicus perspective, the Tyrannofex produces a different kind of concern. The priesthood of Mars does not view the organism only through casualty tables. It examines structural function, weapon integration, durability, and battlefield economy. To the Mechanicus, the Tyrannofex is offensive because it imitates several sacred military categories without machinery, sanctified construction, or machine spirit. It performs the work of a siege tank without steel. It carries artillery without a forge-borne cannon. It uses living ammunition and biological pressure systems where the Imperium would use magazines, reactors, hydraulics, targeting cogitators, and armoured hull assemblies. Mechanicus biologist observers would likely classify the Tyrannofex as a high-value example of Tyranid specialization. Its body shows that the Hive Mind does not simply increase organism size at random. The creature is not just a Carnifex made larger for shock value. Its mass is organized around a particular combat requirement. The thick chitinous armour protects the firing platform. The heavy stance supports the weapon. The internal biology sustains the ammunition process. The sensory and neural systems allow the organism to coordinate with the wider swarm. Every major element serves the role of a living heavy assault platform. Strategically, this matters because the Tyrannofex allows a Tyranid force to compress several battlefield roles into one biological asset. An Imperial armoured unit separates crew, vehicle, ammunition, fuel, repair staff, command signals, and manufacturing origin. A Tyrannofex integrates those requirements into one organism. This does not make it invincible, but it makes it efficient by the standards of the swarm. If destroyed and later recovered by the Tyranids, its biomass can be consumed and reused. If successful, its battlefield data can be absorbed into future Hive fleet adaptation. From the Mechanicus point of view, this makes the Tyrannofex not merely a creature to be killed, but a warning about the self-correcting nature of Tyranid warfare. Administratum observations tend to focus on the visible result of its deployment. Fortified gates fail earlier than expected. Tank companies suffer losses before achieving proper engagement dominance. Infantry commanders request more anti-monster weaponry, only to discover that heavier weapons have already been assigned to deal with other large bioforms. This creates a problem of prioritization. A Tyranid assault rarely presents only one urgent target. Synapse organisms must be killed to disrupt coordination. Fast organisms must be stopped before they overrun firing lines. Flying organisms must be denied access to rear positions. Burrowing organisms must be tracked before they erupt inside the perimeter. The Tyrannofex adds another critical demand by threatening the very hard points that defenders use to survive the rest of the swarm. Mechanicus strategic findings are more technical. Against the rupture cannon, armoured concentration becomes hazardous. Vehicles that would normally operate in formation for mutual support may become easier targets if confined by terrain or defensive doctrine. Against the acid spray, infantry density becomes dangerous, particularly in trenches, bunker mouths, hive corridors, and hab block defense nodes. Against the fleshborer hive, light infantry and exposed support crews become vulnerable to overwhelming biological saturation. These weapon patterns mean that the Tyrannofex cannot be countered by one universal defensive response. The correct response depends on the specific strain encountered, but battlefield identification is often difficult until after the creature has already fired. Some suppressed Administratum fragments speculate that the Tyrannofex is most commonly committed when a Hive fleet has determined that delay is more costly than biomass expenditure. This remains unconfirmed, but the theory is consistent with its battlefield role. The Tyrannofex is not subtle. It is not a reconnaissance form. It is not designed for infiltration or misdirection. It is a blunt strategic instrument brought forward when resistance must be cracked by direct force. Its appearance may indicate that the swarm has identified a defensive anchor whose destruction will accelerate the collapse of the wider theatre. Mechanicus observers sometimes infer that the Tyrannofex also functions as a test platform for weapon symbiosis. This remains speculative, but it fits the broader pattern of Tyranid adaptation. The creature's known weapon configurations suggest that the Hive Mind can tailor the organism to different battlefield problems. A rupture cannon pattern answers heavy armour. An acid spray pattern answers dense infantry and enclosed defences. A fleshborer hive pattern answers massed biological targets and exposed troops. In each case, the body remains the platform while the symbiotic weapon expresses the immediate tactical requirement. The combined conclusion of Administratium and Mechanicus analysis is that the Tyrannofex should never be treated as an isolated monster. Its danger is not only its size, armour or weaponry. Its danger is what it permits the rest of the swarm to do. By threatening tanks, walls, bunkers, and infantry concentrations, it forces defenders to alter their positioning. By drawing heavy fire, it changes target priority. By surviving long enough to fire repeatedly, it reduces the time available for orderly defense. It is a battlefield lever. Once applied, the entire defensive structure begins to shift. For the Adeptus Administratum, the Tyrannofex is a variable that increases expenditure, accelerates casualty curves, and reduces the reliability of fortified resistance. For the Adeptus Mechanicus, it is a biological weapons platform whose design violates Imperial assumptions about the separation of machine, weapon, and operator. Both institutions reach the same practical finding through different methods. When a Tyrannofex is confirmed, the war has entered a heavier phase. The swarm is no longer merely testing the perimeter. It has begun bringing forward the organisms required to break it. From the Adeptus Administratum perspective, the Tyrannofex is difficult to evaluate because it exposes the central difference between Imperial resources and Tyranid resources. The Imperium measures war through production, allocation, shipment, replacement, and loss. A battle tank requires Forge World output, refined metals, machine components, ammunition, fuel, trained crew, maintenance personnel, transport capacity, and time. A fortress gun requires emplacement, power supply, targeting systems, labour core, and repair access. The Tyrannofex appears to perform comparable battlefield functions without any of these categories existing in a recognisable Imperial form. It is not issued from a depot, it is not transported as equipment, it is grown from consumed biomass and deployed as part of the living economy of a hive fleet. This creates a serious administrative problem. Imperial planners can estimate the loss of a Lehman Russ battle tank, a Basilisk artillery piece, or a Baneblade super heavy tank according to industrial cost and replacement delay. They can trace the Forge World that produced it, the regiments that require it, and the ammunition it consumes. With the Tyrannofex, the relevant resource is biomass, and biomass is precisely what a Tyranid invasion is designed to acquire. Every dead soldier, every slaughtered animal, every stripped forest, every emptied ocean, and every ruined city becomes part of the enemy's future resource base if the swarm is not stopped. This means that the Tyrannofex is not merely supported by Tyranid logistics, it is an expression of Tyranid logistics. Adeptus Mechanicus analysis treats this as one of the organism's most threatening features. The Tyrannofex condenses heavy armour, siege artillery, ammunition production, and battlefield mobility into one biological asset. It is not efficient by Imperial standards of craftsmanship, but it is efficient by Tyranid standards of consumption and reuse. If destroyed and the battlefield remains in Imperial control, the creature represents a significant loss to the swarm. If destroyed and the swarm later recovers the area, the loss is reduced because the biomass can be reabsorbed. This makes attrition against the Tyrannofex useful only when accompanied by territorial denial. Killing the organism is not enough if its remains are later reclaimed. The faction strength represented by the Tyrannofex is therefore not limited to its individual firepower. Its true strength lies in the system that produces it. A hive fleet can generate specialized organisms according to strategic pressure, then discard or alter those organisms as conditions change. The Tyrannofex demonstrates that the Tyranids can field heavy battlefield assets without building factories, maintaining armories, or defending supply chains in a conventional manner. Their production base is mobile, biological, and predatory. This allows the Tyranids to transform conquered life into future war material. From an administratum view, this is a nightmare of accounting. The enemy's replenishment rate increases as Imperial civilian and military losses increase. The Tyrannofex also strengthens the swarm by forcing inefficient Imperial responses. An enemy tank can be countered by anti-armor weapons, air attack, mines, melter teams, or artillery. A Tyrannofex can be countered by many of the same categories, but the battlefield conditions surrounding it are far worse. It rarely advances alone. It may be shielded by lesser broods, supported by synapse organisms, accompanied by other monstrous creatures, or covered by aerial and burrowing threats. The Imperium may have enough weapons to kill it in theory, but those weapons are often already committed elsewhere. A Lascanon team aiming at the Tyrannofex is not firing at a Carnifex. A tank hunter missile used against its carapace is not used against a hive tyrant. A battery redirected toward the Tyrannofex may fail to suppress the gaunt surge reaching the trench line. Mechanicus observers identify this as a strength of battlefield saturation. The Tyrannofex does not need to be invulnerable. It only needs to be dangerous enough that it cannot be ignored, and durable enough that killing it consumes disproportionate attention. In this role, even a damaged Tyrannofex may still serve the swarm, if it survives long enough to fire its rupture cannon into armoured formations, bathe a fortified entry point in acid, or release fleshborer organisms into massed infantry. It has already altered the battle. If the enemy then destroys it at high cost, the swarm may still gain advantage through the time and ammunition spent to bring it down. Its weaknesses are real, but they are not always easy to exploit. The Tyrannofex is large, visible, and not optimized for rapid maneuver. It lacks the speed of lighter Tyranid assault organisms and the command importance of dedicated synapse creatures. Its size can make it vulnerable to concentrated heavy weapons, orbital strikes, super heavy armor, massed plasma fire, melter weapons at close range, and coordinated artillery. If isolated from supporting broods and synaptic direction, its battlefield efficiency may degrade. If trapped in terrain that limits its line of fire or prevents it from bringing its primary weapon to bear, its destructive value can be reduced. The Mechanicus also notes that weapon specialization creates predictable limitations once the configuration is known. A rupture cannon pattern is most dangerous to armor and hard targets, but may be less efficient against dispersed infantry. An acid spray pattern is devastating against dense troop formations and enclosed defenses, but does not provide the same long-range anti-armor threat. A fleshborer hive pattern can overwhelm lighter targets, but may struggle to produce the same decisive effect against heavily armored vehicles or reinforced structures. Identification of the weapon pattern is therefore critical. The problem is that battlefield recognition often occurs only after the weapon has already been used. From the administratum perspective, the weakness of the Tyrannofex is also its cost in biomass and deployment priority. Such a creature is not a minor organism. It represents a large investment of biological material that could otherwise support multiple lesser broods or different specialized organisms. This suggests that the Hive Mind deploys Tyrannofex organisms when the battlefield justifies the expenditure. If defenders can destroy them before they achieve meaningful effect, the swarm loses a valuable assault asset. However, this remains a narrow opportunity. Imperial commanders must identify, target, and kill the creature quickly, while also preventing the rest of the swarm from exploiting the concentration of fire. The faction military power reflected by the Tyrannofex is considerable because it demonstrates the Tyranid's ability to contest the Imperium across several levels of warfare. At the tactical level, it destroys tanks, infantry clusters, and defensive hardpoints. At the operational level, it weakens fortified lines and accelerates breakthroughs. At the strategic level, It proves that Tyranid hive fleets can adapt heavy battlefield organisms to the most common strengths of Imperial defence. Its presence means the swarm is not relying only on numbers, it is applying specialised force against the exact tools the Imperium uses to survive. In final assessment, the Adeptus Administratum would classify the Tyrannofex as a major escalation factor in resource planning and defensive endurance. Its confirmed presence increases expected ammunition expenditure, vehicle losses, bunker failure, evacuation urgency, and reinforcement demand. The Adeptus Mechanicus would classify it as a high-threat biological weapons platform, notable for its integrated armour, living artillery systems, and adaptive weapon configurations. Both conclusions meet at the same point. The Tyrannofex is not only a powerful organism, it is proof that Tyranid military power has grown from the failure of those who resist it. Every world that falls teaches the swarm, every defence that delays it can become the reason a heavier organism appears in the next assault. Adeptus Administratum records rarely preserve the Tyrannofex through heroic battlefield accounts. They preserve it through lost summaries, revised evacuation schedules, armour replacement notices, ammunition expenditure tables, and the sudden failure of defensive estimates that had previously been marked as acceptable. When the Tyrannofex appears in the record of a war, it is usually because a fixed position did not hold for the expected duration, an armoured formation suffered disproportionate destruction, or a regional commander requested weapons above the originally approved allocation. In this sense, the Tyrannofex becomes visible to the Administratum not as a named enemy commander or singular legendary beast, but as a repeated cause of strategic underestimation. Across documented Tyranid wars, the most consistent result associated with organisms of this class is the shortening of defensive time. Imperial worlds threatened by hive fleet invasion often attempt to divide survival into phases. The first phase is detection and assessment. The second is fortification and concentration of troops. The third is evacuation of valuable personnel, sacred relics, industrial assets, and military command structures. The final phase is either counterattack or planetary denial. The Tyrannofex threatens the middle of that structure. It does not need to defeat an entire planet by itself. It only needs to break the fortified points that allow those phases to continue in order. Administratum war summaries from Tyranid contested regions would therefore identify the Tyrannofex as a siege acceleration organism. It appears most relevant during assaults against bastion lines, armoured gates, hive city approaches, manufacturum districts, landing fields, and command redoubts. These are the places where the Imperium attempts to concentrate order against the swarm. They are also the places where the Tyrannofex is most useful. A rupture cannon pattern can threaten battle tanks and heavy doors. An acid spray pattern can make close-packed infantry positions untenable. A fleshborer hive pattern can overwhelm exposed crews, militia formations, and lightly armoured defenders who believed distance or barricades would preserve them. The Adeptus Mechanicus records the same events through a different logic. Where the Administratum sees failed timetables, the Mechanicus sees a biological platform successfully fulfilling a heavy weapons role. In wars against the Tyranids, the priesthood often studies which organisms appear after certain forms of resistance are encountered. The Tyrannofex is significant because it suggests that the hive fleet has already identified the enemy's defensive emphasis. If the enemy depends on armour, a rupture cannon pattern is expected to produce the most damaging results. If the enemy depends on trench lines, bunker mouths, and enclosed defensive corridors, acid projection becomes more efficient. If the enemy relies on massed infantry screens and lighter battlefield units, living ammunition becomes sufficient to collapse that layer of protection. Documented Tyranid campaigns against the Imperium show that hive fleets do not win only through the first wave of attack. They win by changing the pressure until the defense can no longer adapt quickly enough. The Tyrannofex belongs to that later pressure. It is not usually the organism that announces the invasion. It is more often the organism that confirms the swarm has committed heavy biological assets to breaking the defender's hardened structure. By the time such a creature is encountered, the war has often moved beyond raids, initial bioprobing, or isolated infestation. The conflict has reached a stage where the swarm is applying direct force against the military architecture of the world. Some administratum annotations connect Tyrannofex sightings with the collapse of local armour confidence. This remains difficult to verify across all reports, because many battlefield records are incomplete, corrupted, or written by survivors under extreme conditions. Still, the pattern is credible. Imperial armoured commanders rely on range, formation discipline, and the ability to destroy large targets before they reach decisive proximity. The Tyrannofex challenges this through durability and firepower. Even when it is eventually destroyed, the damage inflicted before its death may be enough to break a defensive hinge. One tank squadron lost at the wrong moment can expose an infantry line. One breached gate can invalidate an entire fortress plan. One command bunker destroyed before evacuation can scatter local resistance. Mechanicus findings are more cautious, but no less severe. The Tyrannofex does not appear to be a universal solution for every battlefield. It is large, costly in biomass, and vulnerable to concentrated heavy weapons when isolated or fixed in place. Its known weapon patterns also have different ideal targets. This means that a Tyrannofex can be misapplied if the battlefield conditions change faster than the swarm's immediate deployment. However, such weakness is often temporary because Tyranid warfare is adaptive. The loss of one organism may simply provide data for the next assault. If the swarm retains the field, even the corpse becomes part of the enemy's future strength. In several suppressed or fragmentary assessments, it is believed that Tyrannofex organisms may be committed more frequently when a hive fleet encounters a world that still possesses functioning heavy industry or organised armoured resistance. This remains unconfirmed, but it fits the strategic evidence. A planet with manufactorums, vehicle yards, fortress walls, and armoured counterattack capability presents problems that lesser organisms alone may not solve efficiently. In such conditions, the Tyrannofex gives the swarm a direct answer to the physical symbols of Imperial military power. It does not need to occupy the forge, it only needs to destroy the guns, open the gates, and allow the feeder organisms to reach what remains. The results of wars involving Tyrannofex deployment are therefore measured less by the creature's survival and more by what its presence enables. If the Tyrannofex destroys a tank column, the swarm gains open ground. If it breaks a bunker line, the gaunts and warrior organisms behind it gain access. If it forces defenders to redirect heavy weapons, other monstrous creatures and synapse organisms may survive longer. If it dies after absorbing concentrated fire, that death may still serve the swarm by exhausting the enemy's limited anti-monster resources. Its victory condition is not individual survival. Its victory condition is the collapse of the defender's strongest point. From the Adeptus Administratum perspective, the conclusion is practical and grim. Any confirmed Tyrannofex presence requires immediate revision of defensive endurance estimates, armour survivability projections, and evacuation priority. Commanders who treat the organism as a single large target risk misunderstanding its strategic purpose. It is not simply there to kill, it is there to change the shape of the battle so that the rest of the swarm can kill more efficiently. From the Adeptus Mechanicus perspective, the conclusion is technical and doctrinal. The Tyrannofex is a biological siege asset whose existence proves that the Tyranids can grow answers to battlefield categories the Imperium normally reserves for machines. It can imitate the effect of artillery, assault armour, and area denial weapons without sharing their mechanical dependencies. It is a living contradiction to Imperial assumptions about warfare, because it shows that a hive fleet can produce heavy battlefield power without forge rights, crews, fuel chains, or sacred engines. The final joint assessment is that the Tyrannofex should be recorded as a major threat organism in any Tyranid war, where fortified resistance remains active. Its documented effect is not limited to destruction inflicted by its weapons. Its broader effect is the weakening of defensive certainty. It forces the Administratum to recalculate losses and forces the Mechanicus to acknowledge a form of living engineering that cannot be dismissed as instinctive brute force. When it appears, the war has entered a stage where the Hive Mind is no longer merely consuming the weak edges of a defense. It is attacking the structures that allow resistance to exist at all. To the Inquisition, the Tyrannofex is not only a battlefield organism, it is evidence. Its presence indicates that the Tyranid swarm has recognized a specific form of resistance and has responded with a biological instrument suited to breaking it. This is the point at which inquisitorial analysis separates itself from the more procedural records of the Adeptus Administratum and the more technical evaluations of the Adeptus Mechanicus. The Inquisition does not ask only what the creature can destroy, it asks what its appearance reveals about the unseen calculations of the Hive Mind. The first impression recorded in Inquisition archives is usually one of escalation. A Tyrannofex sighting is not treated as a minor variation in swarm composition. It suggests that the local war has entered a phase where the Hive fleet is no longer relying on numbers, speed, and encirclement alone. The swarm has begun committing heavy, specialized organisms against hardened targets. This matters because it can indicate a shift in the invasion's priorities. If a Tyrannofex is observed near a fortress gate, a void shield generator, an armoured depot, a hive wall, or a command district, the creature may reveal which position the swarm has identified as central to the defence. Inquisitorial observers therefore treat the Tyrannofex as a marker of strategic intent. Its direction of movement, weapon configuration, target selection, and supporting broods all become relevant. A rupture cannon pattern approaching an armoured reserve suggests that the swarm is preparing to neutralise mobile counterattack capacity. An acid spray pattern advancing toward trench networks or hab block entry corridors suggests the expected destruction of dense infantry resistance. A fleshborer hive pattern deployed against exposed militia or support formations suggests that the swarm is clearing lighter defensive layers before committing faster organisms into the breach. These observations do not prove conscious strategy in a human sense, but they support the conclusion that the hive mind applies specialized force with disturbing precision. The Inquisition's concern deepens when the Tyrannofex appears repeatedly after specific Imperial tactics have succeeded. Some reports describe earlier battles in which armoured formations briefly delayed the swarm, only for later assaults to include organisms better suited to destroying vehicles and fortified engines. Other accounts describe trench lines and bunker systems holding against lesser waves, followed by the appearance of acid-bearing heavy organisms in subsequent engagements. These records are not always complete enough to prove direct adaptation within a single campaign, but the pattern is difficult to ignore. It is believed by some inquisitorial analysts that Tyrannofex deployment may serve as one of the clearest field indicators that the hive mind has absorbed the lesson of a previous defensive success. This remains unconfirmed in the strictest evidentiary sense. Tyranid behaviour is difficult to study because worlds that experience full hive fleet assault rarely preserve complete archives. Survivors are often traumatized, contaminated, relocated, executed, or silenced by necessity. Data looms are destroyed, fortress cogitators are consumed. Battlefield remains are either reclaimed by Imperial forces under crisis conditions or absorbed by the swarm. As a result, the Inquisition must often work with damage pick captures, partial Vox transcripts, Mechanicus kill team extractions, and testimony from soldiers who saw only fragments of the wider battle. Even so, the repetition of Tyrannofex appearances in relation to fortified resistance has produced considerable internal interest. The first major inquisitorial observation is that the Tyrannofex undermines the human instinct to classify Tyranids as beasts. It is physically monstrous, but its role is not random. It does not simply charge the nearest target in a frenzy when under synaptic direction. It moves as part of an assault pattern. It pressures the strong point that matters. It draws fire when the swarm benefits from that distraction. It breaks walls, tanks, and infantry concentrations so lesser organisms can exploit the opening. To the Inquisition, this reinforces the most dangerous truth about the Tyranids. Their forms may appear animalistic, but the intelligence behind them is strategic, adaptive, and vast. The second observation concerns fear management. Inquisition field officers understand that morale can collapse when defenders realize that their strongest weapons are being answered directly. Infantry can endure waves of lesser organisms if they believe walls and guns will hold. Tank crews can remain disciplined if they believe their armour gives them battlefield authority. commanders can maintain order if they believe the defensive plan still has a measurable duration. The Tyrannofex damages all three assumptions. It can make walls appear temporary, armour appear fragile, and battle plans appear obsolete. For this reason, some inquisitorial memoranda recommend controlling the spread of Tyrannofex reports among civilian populations and lower-grade militia formations. The conspiracy findings attached to the Tyrannofex are more uncertain, but they persist in sealed discussions. One suppressed theory claims that certain genestealer cult uprisings may deliberately preserve infrastructure that later attracts heavy Tyranid bioforms. This remains speculative. The claim suggests that by leaving gates, armoured depots, manufactorum defences, or command bastions intact during the early uprising, cult agents may help shape the battlefield into one where the Hive fleet benefits from deploying organisms like the Tyrannofex. There is no universal proof of coordination at this level, but inquisitorial agents have noted cases where sabotage appears selective rather than total. Some defences are weakened, others are left standing long enough to become focal points for the incoming swarm. A second theory suggests that the Tyrannofex may be used by the Hive Mind as an assessment organism as much as a siege organism. According to this view, the creature's weapon pattern and battlefield placement may help reveal which Imperial defences provoke the strongest reactions. If a fortress commits its heaviest guns against a Tyrannofex, Synapse organisms may identify those guns as priority threats. If armour moves to intercept it, the swarm exposes reserve routes. If command bunkers redirect fire control to stop it, other organisms may exploit the momentary loss of attention elsewhere. This remains unconfirmed, but it aligns with observed Tyranid behaviour in which even apparent sacrifices can serve larger battlefield learning. A third and more extreme claim argues that some Tyrannofex strains may preserve biological memory of previously encountered defensive materials, armour compositions, or structural weaknesses. This remains unsupported by reliable evidence and should be treated only as speculative inquisitorial concern. The Tyranids are known for adaptation across Hive fleet activity, but proving memory within a specific organism class is far more difficult. Still, the idea persists because the Tyrannofex appears too purpose-built to be dismissed as brute mass. Inquisitors charged with Tyranid containment tend to treat even weak theories seriously when those theories concern the learning capacity of the Hive Mind. The Inquisition's provisional conclusion is that the Tyrannofex should be considered both a combat threat and an intelligence indicator. Its presence reveals what the swarm intends to break. Its weapon configuration reveals what resistance the swarm expects. Its behaviour under fire reveals whether the local synaptic network is prioritising destruction, distraction, or breakthrough. No single sighting is enough to decode a Hive fleet's entire strategy, but multiple sightings across a campaign may form a pattern. For the Inquisition, the Tyrannofex is therefore more than a living gun platform. It is a message written in chitin, mass, and biological firepower. It tells the observer that the Hive Mind has measured the battlefield and found a hard point worthy of specialised destruction. It tells commanders that static confidence is dangerous. It tells interrogators that even a creature without personal thought may express the intent of something far larger. The Tyrannofex does not conspire in the human sense. It does not plan in secret chambers or speak through agents. Yet its deployment can reveal the shape of a conspiracy older and wider than any single cult. The silent coordination of a species that turns every defense into data, every survivor's report into a warning, and every failed fortress into the basis for the next organism grown to destroy one. Inquisition. Interrogative findings concerning the Tyrannofex are rarely derived from a single complete testimony. Most records are assembled from broken sources, surviving tank crews, infantry officers pulled from collapsing defense lines, Auspex adepts who interpreted partial returns under bombardment, and sanctioned biologist personnel forced to identify the organism from damage pit captures. These interrogations tend to produce one consistent pattern. The Tyrannofex is often recognized too late. By the time a witness understands that the approaching mass is not merely another large assault beast, the creature has usually already fired, already breached a position, or already forced the defenders to abandon their original plan. The first, Interrogative finding is that ordinary soldiers often misidentify the Tyrannofex during the opening moments of contact. Guardsmen familiar with Tyranid assaults may assume they are seeing a Carnifex strain, a heavy warrior organism, or another monstrous form advancing with the swarm. This confusion is understandable under battlefield conditions. The creature's size, chitin, and forward movement place it within the general category of large Tyranid bioforms in the minds of most infantry. The distinction becomes clear only when its primary weapon is observed. Once the rupture cannon fires, once acid is projected across a defensive line, or once a swarm of fleshborer organisms is expelled from its weapon chambers, the witness descriptions become more precise and more frightened. Surviving armoured crews provide some of the most useful testimony. Their accounts repeatedly describe a target that should have been slow enough to destroy before reaching meaningful range, yet durable enough to survive the opening exchange. Crews report repeated impacts against the creature's carapace with uncertain effect. Some describe Lascannon strikes that wounded or staggered the organism, but did not immediately stop its advance. Others describe battle cannon shells detonating against its armour, while lesser organisms continued moving around it. These accounts are often inconsistent in detail, but they agree on one point. The Tyrannofex forces armoured units into decisions they are not accustomed to making against biological targets. They must choose between maintaining formation, withdrawing to preserve vehicles, or concentrating fire at the risk of exposing nearby infantry. Interrogations of bunker survivors are more fragmented. Many do not see the Tyrannofex directly. They experience its presence through structural failure. The first sign may be a gate impact, a sudden breach in reinforced material, or the collapse of a firing chamber after a projectile strikes. In acid spray encounters, survivors describe a chemical burning effect that penetrates defensive gaps, consumes exposed flesh, and renders enclosed positions impossible to hold. These reports are often marked for caution because panic, smoke, darkness, and sensory shock distort recollection. Even so, the Inquisition treats them as valuable because they reveal how the Tyrannofex affects defensive psychology. The organism does not need to enter the bunker to defeat the bunker. It only needs to make the interior uninhabitable, the entrance indefensible, or the wall unreliable. Several documented encounters indicate that Tyrannofex deployment often coincides with high swarm pressure elsewhere on the line. This has led inquisitorial interrogators to ask whether witnesses saw the creature as the main threat or as one part of a wider overload pattern. The answer is rarely simple. A soldier under attack by gaunts will remember the gaunts. A tank crew under threat from a rupture cannon will remember the Tyrannofex. A command staff watching the entire defense collapse may identify the creature as one of several simultaneous pressure points. From these overlapping testimonies, the Inquisition concludes that the Tyrannofex is most dangerous when it forces defenders to treat it as the central threat, while the rest of the swarm continues applying pressure across multiple sectors. One recurring anomaly involves apparent target selection. In several accounts, Tyrannofex organisms appear to ignore easier targets in favour of fortified positions, armoured vehicles, or defensive nodes with greater strategic value. This does not prove individual intelligence. The creature itself is not believed to reason like a commander. However, under synaptic control, its actions can appear disturbingly deliberate. A Tyrannofex may advance past scattered infantry, while directing its primary weapon toward a bunker, a tank, or a gate mechanism. It may fire into a hard point rather than into a denser biological target. To witnesses, this creates the impression that the organism understands the defense. Inquisitorial analysis attributes this to the directing influence of the hive mind rather than personal judgment within the creature. Another anomaly concerns damage tolerance. Some reports describe Tyrannofex organisms continuing to function after wounds that would disable or kill many other large creatures. A ruptured limb, cracked carapace, exposed internal tissue, or partial destruction of secondary weapon growths may not immediately stop the organism from firing or advancing. The Inquisition does not treat these accounts as evidence of invulnerability. Rather, it interprets them as evidence of combat prioritization within the organism's biological design. The Tyrannofex appears built to remain effective long enough to complete a battlefield task, even under extreme trauma. It does not need to preserve itself in the manner of a rational soldier. If it fires one more shot before death and that shot opens the defense, the swarm has gained value. A third anomaly appears in reports where Tyrannofex organisms are encountered after an earlier defensive success against lesser swarms. In some campaigns, defenders describe defeating initial Tyranid pressure through armour, layered fortification, or concentrated kill zones, only for a later attack to include heavier organisms suited to overcoming those exact methods. This remains difficult to prove as direct local adaptation. The time between engagements, the possible presence of different bioforms already in reserve, and the incomplete nature of Imperial observation all complicate the matter. Still, Inquisition interrogators preserve these cases because they may indicate the Hive Mind's capacity to escalate with precision after testing a defense. Documented encounters also show that the Tyrannofex is not always deployed in the same manner. In open terrain, rupture cannon organisms are most often associated with the destruction or disruption of armour. In dense urban environments, acid-bearing forms become more terrifying because they can attack barricades, tunnel entrances, hab-block choke points, and trench networks. In poorly trained defence zones with large militia formations, fleshborer hive configurations can cause rapid collapse among exposed troops who lack sealed armour or disciplined dispersal. These differences matter in interrogation because witnesses who describe one weapon pattern may incorrectly assume that all Tyrannofex organisms behave the same way. The Inquisition treats that assumption as dangerous. In one category of sealed encounter reports, it is believed that Tyrannofex organisms were used to pressure evacuation corridors rather than primary fortress walls. This remains unconfirmed, but the implication is severe. If accurate, it would suggest that the Hive Mind recognized not only the strongest defensive point, but also the route through which valuable personnel or military command elements intended to escape. A Tyrannofex placed against such a corridor does not need to conquer the entire city. It only needs to destroy the vehicles, collapse the gate, or saturate the corridor long enough for faster organisms to close. Inquisitors reviewing these reports often recommend that evacuation planning during Tyranid invasion should assume that obvious hardened routes may become priority targets once the swarm identifies their importance. Some interrogative records include testimony from captured or purged gene-stealer cult associates, though such material is treated with extreme caution. A few claim that their uprising cells were instructed, through dreams or instinctive compulsion, to mark or preserve certain structures before the Hive Fleet's arrival. This remains unverified and may reflect delusion, psychic contamination, or post-capture invention. However, Inquisition analysts note that if cult activity can help shape the battlefield before the main invasion, then heavy organisms like the Tyrannofex may benefit from those conditions later. A gate left functional, a tank depot only partially sabotaged, or a command bastion preserved as a focal point could become a target whose destruction serves the swarm's psychological and strategic needs. The final interrogative finding is that the Tyrannofex creates unreliable witnesses not because they lie, but because the organism changes the battle too quickly for clean observation. A tank crew sees only the weapon that killed its squadron. A bunker officer remembers the wall failing. A militia survivor remembers acid, living ammunition, heat, stink, and panic. A Mechanicus observer records carapace thickness, weapon pattern, and damage response. Each account is incomplete, but together they reveal the same organism through different failures. The Tyrannofex is not merely seen, it is inferred from what stops working around it. For the Inquisition, this makes the Tyrannofex an anomaly of interpretation as much as biology. It is a creature that exposes the limits of human battlefield understanding. It appears as a monster to infantry, as an anti-armour threat to vehicle crews, as a siege platform to fortress commanders, and as a biological weapon system to the Mechanicus. All are correct, but none are sufficient alone. The Inquisition therefore preserves these encounters not simply to identify the organism, but to identify the pattern of collapse that follows it. The conclusion of the interrogative record is that any Tyrannofex sighting must be treated as both immediate threat data and evidence of wider swarm intent. Its weapon type must be identified as early as possible, its direction of advance must be mapped. The targets it ignores must be considered as important as the targets it attacks. Its supporting organisms must be recorded, because they may reveal whether the creature is being used as a breaching unit, a distraction, a heavy weapons anchor, or a pressure tool against evacuation and command structure. In the eyes of the Inquisition, the Tyrannofex is not silent because it lacks meaning. It is silent because the message is delivered through destroyed armour, breached walls, burned defenders, and the sudden realization that the Hive Mind has already learned where the defense was strongest. Classified Inquisition files concerning the Tyrannofex are not sealed because the organism is misunderstood. They are sealed because some of the conclusions attached to it are considered damaging to Imperial morale and dangerous to defensive planning if circulated without control. The Tyrannofex is already known to many military organs as a heavy Tyranid siege organism, a living weapons platform, and a major threat to armour and fortifications. That level of knowledge is permitted where it improves battlefield readiness. What remains restricted are the deeper implications, that the Hive Mind may use such organisms not only to destroy hardened targets, but to study the defensive habits of the Imperium itself. The first classified concern is that Tyrannofex deployment may reveal the swarm's ability to identify structural importance faster than Imperial commanders expect. In several sealed summaries, the organism is recorded advancing not toward the largest concentration of biomass, but toward the point whose destruction would produce the greatest operational collapse. These points include fortified gates, vehicle reserves, artillery positions, generator stations, evacuation causeways, and command bunkers. The creature does not require personal awareness to perform this function. Under synaptic direction, it becomes the visible hand of a wider intelligence. The Inquisition therefore treats its movement as possible evidence of battlefield analysis by the Hive Mind. This conclusion is dangerous because it challenges a comforting assumption held by many local commanders. The common belief is that Tyranid attacks can be delayed by forcing the swarm into predictable channels of mass assault. Walls, trenches, mine belts, kill zones, and armoured counterattack lanes are built around the expectation that the enemy will press forward through volume. That expectation is not entirely false, but it is incomplete. The Tyrannofex proves that the swarm can also apply specialised violence against selected hardpoints. A defence that appears strong may become a beacon. The stronger the position, the more likely it is to attract the very organism evolved to break it. A second classified file concerns the possibility of pre-invasion battlefield preparation by gene-stealer cult activity. This remains unconfirmed and is not treated as universal doctrine. However, certain Inquisition records suggest that cult cells may not always seek total sabotage before the Hive fleet arrives. In some cases, it is believed that they may weaken specific defences while preserving others. A damaged command network can produce confusion. A partially intact gate can concentrate defenders. A surviving tank depot can draw armoured assets into predictable locations. If later Tyrannofex deployment targets those preserved structures, the result may appear coincidental to ordinary observers. The Inquisition does not dismiss coincidence, but it does not trust it either. The danger of this theory is not that every cult uprising consciously directs Tyrannofex organisms. There is no reliable evidence for such precise command. The danger is that cult activity may shape the battlefield in ways that the Hive Mind can exploit once the main swarm arrives. A human traitor does not need to understand the final purpose of their sabotage. A cult magus does not need to issue instructions to a living siege beast. It may be enough for the cult to prepare conditions that make Imperial defences readable, brittle, and clustered around predictable points. The Tyrannofex then becomes the instrument that completes the collapse those preparations made possible. A third sealed concern involves the reuse of battlefield data. Mechanicus authorities often describe Tyranid adaptation in terms of biological modification, but the Inquisition is more concerned with strategic memory. A destroyed fortress is not merely destroyed, it may become information. A successful anti-Tyranid defense may not remain successful once the swarm has absorbed its pattern. A tank company that delays an assault may teach the Hive Mind where armoured strength is concentrated. A bunker network that resists lesser organisms may identify the need for acid-bearing heavy forms. A void-shielded gate that survives an initial swarm may become a priority for rupture cannon organisms in a later attack. This is why some inquisitorial files recommend the destruction of sensitive battlefield data even during evacuation. Maps of defensive corridors, armour reserves, manufactorum layouts, ammunition stores, and command transit routes are to be denied not only to human collaborators, but to any chain of events that could allow the swarm to infer their value. These recommendations are difficult to enforce during planetary invasion. Panic, damaged communications, and local command rivalry often reduce compliance. Still, the warning remains. Against the Tyranids, information does not need to be stolen in the conventional sense. It may be revealed through how defenders move, where they gather, and what they choose to protect. The Tyrannofex is central to this fear because it attacks what the Imperium values most in a defensive battle: durability, armour, and fixed strength. It is not the fastest Tyranid organism, it is not the most subtle, it is not the supreme synaptic commander of the swarm. Its significance lies in the fact that it is grown to punish the assumption that physical hardness alone can hold the line. A fortress that cannot adapt becomes a target. A tank formation that cannot disperse becomes a target. A trench network that cannot relocate becomes a channel for death. The Tyrannofex is not simply strong. It is strong in the exact way required to make static confidence fail. Several classified encounter summaries also note the organism's value as a misdirection asset. In some engagements, defenders committed disproportionate heavy fire to stopping a Tyrannofex, only for synapse organisms or faster assault broods to exploit the shift in attention. This does not make the Tyrannofex a decoy in the weak sense. It remains too destructive to ignore. That is what makes the dilemma effective. If it is not targeted, it may break the wall. If it is targeted, other parts of the swarm gain space. The Inquisition considers this one of the more serious tactical problems posed by the organism. It weaponizes the defender's correct decision. The final classified category concerns morale contamination. Reports of Tyrannofex encounters are often edited before distribution to planetary defense forces. Technical information may be retained, but fatalistic language is removed. Witness accounts describing armour being torn open, bunkers rendered useless, or entire defense schedules collapsing are restricted to command-grade review. The reason is simple: the Imperium depends on defensive belief. Soldiers must believe the wall can hold long enough. Tank crews must believe their armour matters. Civilians must believe evacuation routes are protected. The Tyrannofex does not only damage those things physically, it damages the confidence attached to them. The Inquisition's final conclusion is that the Tyrannofex should be treated as both a biological siege organism and a strategic signal. Its confirmed presence means that the Hive Mind has moved beyond general pressure and has begun applying specialized force against selected points of resistance. Its weapon configuration must be identified immediately. Its target path must be analyzed for indications of swarm intent. Its supporting organisms must be mapped. Its appearance must trigger review of evacuation plans, armor deployment, command bunker security, and the possibility of prior cult interference. In the wider assessment of Tyranid warfare, the Tyrannofex represents the terrifying efficiency of a species that does not separate life from weaponry. It has no personal doctrine, but it expresses doctrine. It has no ambition, but it advances toward objectives. It has no hatred, but it destroys with the precision of something that has learned where destruction matters most. To the Inquisition, this makes the creature more disturbing than an ordinary monster. A monster may be slain and forgotten. A weapon may be catalogued and countered. The Tyrannofex is both, and also something more, a living indication that the Hive Mind has read the battlefield and found the pressure point. The final sealed judgment is direct. Any world that confirms Tyrannofex deployment must assume that its strongest defences are already under evaluation. The organism should not be studied only after it fires. It should be studied from the moment it appears, because its presence may reveal the next stage of the invasion before that stage begins. Where it walks, the swarm has identified resistance worth breaking. Where it aims, the Hive Mind has found value in destruction. Where it survives long enough to fire, Imperial confidence begins to fail. And where confidence fails, the Tyranids require only one thing more: access to the biomass behind the wall.